Hi, welcome to Brain Flip 2, and today we're going to be talking about the different structures and functions of the internal structures of the brain. All right, quick. What method of studying the brain is this, and who else used this method to study the brain? Pause. And yes, it is dissection, and it is Lashley who did the original mapping of a rat's brain by cutting off 1/10 of the brain. Now, before we go into individual parts, it's really important to know that while we're identifying small pieces of the brain and their functions, that in reality, the way that we get our complexity is the pieces working together. So I wanted you to kind of see all the pieces together as they function. All right, so here we are with the whole split brain. This is where Gazania went through and cut Joe's brain and other epileptic patients, right, so that they couldn't communicate to the right and the left side. But today we're going to be focusing on this whole area here, which is the sort of internal structures of the brain. One way to think about this is sort of evolutionary. So a good way to remember all the different functions is to sort of in your mind see where they're located. So anything that is located here in the brainstem area is all autonomic systems, things that we don't think about, things that even worms, for instance, have to be able to survive. It is not till we get to the limbic system here that we begin to develop drives and emotions, and we see this in lower order mammals. Right, and then evolutionarily we began to develop the neocortex, so that here's where we have complex thinking and decision making going on. As we move up into more complex mammals, this neocortex becomes even larger, even though there is not a one-to-one correspondence between size and ability to think. Let's go down into the hindbrain and start out with obviously the brainstem, which connects to the spinal cord. If we don't have that, we cannot reach those higher emotional centers. Here we have the medulla of the medulla oblongata fame. Here we're talking about heart rate, blood pressure, those kinds of autonomic systems. And here we have the pons. This regulates sleep, awakeness, and alertness. So if you have sleeping disorders, insomnia, it may be that there is something malfunctioning in that pons area. We have the cerebellum, which is balance and different kinds of movement. And then we have finally the reticular activating system or formation. Now, a really interesting piece here, because scientists are trying to find out where's our connection between our sort of brain function and our consciousness. Where do we become who we are? And some scientists speculate that it lies somewhere along the system, in part because if you sit here and see that the connection is from the things that sort of keep us alive and functioning, all right, and it travels all through all of this more complex system, and the tip here lies right underneath the limbic system, where we begin to have our emotional centers. And so some scientists think that it is in this area that that connection or that switch is. So let's talk a little bit about the limbic system. Right? So we have the thalamus. Think of the thalamus as sort of the director, the orchestra. It has to take all this information and send it to the right part of the brain. So sometimes when we have dysfunctions, it is that the thalamus is not sending the information to the correct part of the brain to be able to be analyzed and to determine what action to take. We then have the hypothalamus. We've come across the hypothalamus before. When we talked about eating, we know that there's the lateral and ventral medial that turns on and off our appetite. And we also have disorders like people who want to eat hair or eat metal. They think that the disorder occurs there in the hypothalamus. Right? They take care of other drives also that are very basic. The amygdala also takes care of drives on the other side. So one way to distinguish between the two, right, is that here the AME or the A stands for anger and aggression, other kinds of emotional kinds of drives, whereas the hypothalamus, right, is really dealing with the 4 F's: fear, flight, food, and fornication. So it's different kinds of drives, and they seem to work differently in terms of that. Then we have the hippocampus here. The hippocampus sort of meaning seahorse. Somehow that structure there looks like a seahorse to early scientists, and that primarily has to do with memory. And interesting new studies where they've seen now that we even have sort of muscle memory in terms of the connection between the cerebellum and the hippocampus, right? And all this gets sent by the thalamus to the upper regions, and the information is shared by the corpus callosum, which is what Gazania cut. All right, thank you very much.